Poland doesn't want immigrants anymore. Prime Minister Donald Tusk declared in April 2024, refusing the EU's new migrant relocation plan. He called it a sovereign decision, and most polls agreed. A national survey showed nearly 75% of citizens opposed the idea of forced relocation. That single statement drew a red line between Warsaw and Brussels and opened a new political fault line inside the European Union. To understand the scale of this shift, you have to see the numbers. Poland's population sits around 37.5 million and is shrinking fast. Yet, more than 1.13 million foreign workers are already in the country, filling construction sites, factories, and transport routes. That's roughly 7% of the insured workforce. The contrast is clear. The economy depends on outside labor, yet the political climate is turning sharply against immigration. Tusk's announcement wasn't only about policy, it was a message of control. "We will not take part in this," he said, rejecting the EU solidarity mechanism designed to relocate asylum seekers across member states. Brussels described the system as fair burden sharing. Warsaw saw it as an unwanted imposition. The statement resonated it across the country. Television debates, online forums, and newspapers framed it as an act of national self-determination. Demonstrations followed, with banners calling for tighter borders and protection of national values. Even moderate voices argued that Poland had already shouldered enough by hosting nearly 1 million Ukrainian refugees. The viewpoint was simple: we've done our part. Behind the politics, however, are growing demographic pressures. Poland's birth rate ranks among the lowest in Europe. Small towns are losing people, schools are closing, and factories can't find enough workers. The OECD estimates Poland may need at least 2 million additional workers in the coming decade just to maintain economic stability. Yet, few leaders want to risk political backlash by suggesting broader immigration. In this environment, defiance plays well. It projects strength and sovereignty, values that appeal deeply to Polish voters who remember decades of foreign control. But as the rhetoric hardens, labor migration continues quietly through regulated channels, short-term contracts, work permits, and targeted recruitment of Ukrainians, Belarusians, and Asian workers. Officially, Poland rejects migration quotas. In practice, it selectively depends on the very movement it opposes. That tension defines Poland's current position, a nation trying to protect its cultural identity while sustaining its economy with imported labor. The strategy satisfies short-term politics but raises long-term questions. Can a shrinking workforce and aging society afford to close the door too tightly? How long can political sovereignty outweigh demographic reality? The answers will determine not just Poland's economic failure, but its role inside a changing Europe. While Warsaw insists it's closing the door, the data shows another story. Behind the headlines and protests, immigration to Poland is quietly expanding, not through asylum routes, but through work permits and labor programs. In 2023, more than 1.13 million foreigners were registered in Poland's special insurance system, up sharply from the year before. Most came from Ukraine, Belarus, Georgia, India, Nepal, and the Philippines. They are not political refugees. They are the workforce keeping the Polish economy running. Factories that can't find welders, farms without pickers, and hospitals short on caregivers are all turning to foreign labor. Nearly 69% of Poland's new long-term residence permits in 2022 were issued for employment. Family migration made up about 11%. Asylum seekers? Barely a fraction. The government rarely highlights these numbers, but business owners know them well. Without imported labor, production slows, costs rise, and exports falter. It's an uncomfortable truth for the policymakers. Publicly, they defend strict border control. Privately, they're expanding programs that bring in workers under temporary or rotational contracts. These migrants pay into the system, pay taxes, and fill the demographic gaps that Polish workers alone can't. Yet, the political narrative avoids acknowledging this dependence, fearing backlash from voters who equate immigration with chaos. Even so, the streets tell a different story. In Warsaw, Filipino nurses now work in hospitals once short-staffed for years. In Poznan, Nepali and Uzbek, workers fill logistics hubs. In the small town of Opole, local businesses say they'd shut down without Ukrainian employees. Poland isn't closing its doors, it's replacing open immigration with controlled importation. The quiet part? Many of these workers will never stay long-term. They're on temporary visas that can be withdrawn at any time. This keeps the numbers flexible and the politics manageable, but it also leaves migrants without stability or integration. Economists warn that such a transient system might solve labor shortages in the short term, but build social fragility in the long run. Still, to voters, the arrangement feels clean. No open camps, no quotas from Brussels, no visible crisis. The system works as long as the narrative holds that these are workers and not migrants. That distinction shapes how Poland talks about its future: who belongs, who doesn't, and who's just passing through. Yet every factory contract and residence permit chips away at the illusion of self-reliance. The numbers keep rising, and each year, Poland grows more dependent on the very migration it insists it's resisting. The contradiction is no longer hidden in data, it's visible on every construction site and supermarket floor. Poland's leaders may promise control, but the economy tells its own story. And the story is one of quiet expansion, silent reliance, and a future that's far less close than it sounds. Beneath the politics and protests lies a quieter emergency. Poland is running out of people. The headlines talk about sovereignty and border control, but the deeper issue is demographic collapse. In 2023, the population stood at roughly 37.49 million. The birth rate fell to one of the lowest in the European Union, at about 1.26 children per woman. More Poles are dying than being born, and more are leaving than arriving. For decades, Poland's workforce fueled its post-communist rise. Cheap, educated, and hard-working. But the generation that built that growth is aging fast. By 2030, nearly a quarter of the population will be over 65. Meanwhile, the number of working-age Poles is shrinking by about 150,000 every year. Factories can't find staff, small towns are hollowing out, and universities are competing for a shrinking pool of students. The numbers reveal the full contradiction. The country that says it doesn't want immigrants may soon have no choice but to rely on them. The OECD estimates that to maintain current economic output and support its pension system, Poland will need at least 2 million additional workers within the next decade. Without them, the labor shortage will deepen, the tax base will erode, and the social system will strain under the weight of retirees. Yet, for many voters, demographic data feels abstract. The fear of losing national identity feels real. Politicians have learned to play that fear well, defending culture, family, and sovereignty against what they frame as uncontrolled migration. But demographics don't negotiate with ideology. A shrinking population means fewer taxpayers, fewer consumers, and fewer soldiers. National strength doesn't survive on pride alone. Some policymakers have quietly begun to acknowledge it. Initiatives to encourage childbirth, like family subsidies and childcare programs, haven't reversed the trend. Since 2017, the birth rate has continued to fall despite billions spent. Migration, meanwhile, has kept sectors like construction, agriculture, and logistics from collapsing. But even that fix is temporary if the government refuses long-term integration. The deeper question now is existential. Can Poland preserve its identity while depending on foreign labor to sustain its economy? Every indicator points to an approaching cliff. The workforce is shrinking, the median age rising, and productivity alone can't offset the loss. Economists warn that without a new approach, Poland's population could fall below 35 million by 2040. The debate isn't really about migrants anymore, it's about survival. A nation can close its borders, but it can't close its demographic deficit. And the longer Poland delays a solution, the harder the math will become to escape. Poland believes it's found a solution. Let in workers it chooses, reject the migrants it doesn't. A controlled gate, not an open door, if you will. On paper, it does sound logical. Protect national identity while filling labor gaps. But in practice, the system is starting to crack, honestly. The labor-only model depends on selective acceptance. Ukrainians and Belarusians can work because they're seen as, well, culturally similar. Asian and Middle Eastern migrants face higher barriers, longer vetting, and shorter visas. Officially, it's about labor needs. Unofficially, it's about politics. Each restriction is designed to reassure voters that Poland hasn't gone soft on migration. Yet, these same policies now threaten the country's own economy. Employers in manufacturing and logistics already warn of shortages. In 2025, several major construction projects in Warsaw and Krakow slowed because contracts expired for thousands of temporary workers. Companies can't plan for the future when their labor supply depends on 3-month visas. One logistics executive summed it up: "We're importing workers faster than we can train them, then sending them home before they become valuable." The contradictions multiply. The government says it rejects the EU's relocation scheme to maintain sovereignty, but Poland's industries rely heavily on EU trade and investment. If Brussels ties future funding to cooperation on migration, Warsaw could face tough choices. Meanwhile, domestic wages are rising as competition for workers intensifies. A short-term win for employees, but a long-term drag on competitiveness. This tension reaches beyond economics. Culturally, Poland defines itself as homogeneous, Catholic, traditional, and cohesive. But rapid labor migration, even when temporary, is changing city life. In Gdansk and Wrocław, local schools now offer language support for children of foreign workers. Polish parents call it adaptation. Some politicians call it dilution. The framing keeps the debate emotional and makes any realistic reform politically explosive. Inside the government, advisors are split. Economists argue expanding work visas and easing long-term residence rules to stabilize the workforce. Political strategists warn that any move toward integration could cost the ruling condition its base. So, the country maintains two narratives at once. It doesn't want immigrants, but it can't function without them. This balancing act can't last forever. The more Poland relies on controlled migration, the more fragile that control becomes. When one policy shift in Brussels or one border crisis in Belarus can disrupt thousands of jobs, sovereignty starts to look less like strength and more like exposure. Poland's leaders promise stability, but selective dependency isn't stability. It's leverage waiting to fail. A system that protects political power today could become the same mechanism that undermines it tomorrow. Because once a nation's economy depends on what it denies, policy isn't controlled anymore. It's contradiction on autopilot. The strategy worked for a while, and Poland could reject EU migrant quotas, claim moral victory, and still import the workers it needed through quiet channels. But every short-term fix has a breaking point. The deeper numbers show a trajectory that no government spin can handle. By 2040, Poland's population could fall below 35 million. The number of retirees will rise by more than 30%, while the working-age population will fall by nearly 15%. Without enough taxpayers to fund pensions and healthcare, the strain will eventually reach every household. Economists already warn that growth will slow to half its current pace if labor shortages persist. National sovereignty doesn't pay the bills when the workforce disappears. For now, policymakers frame this as a choice: security versus migration. But soon, it may not be a choice at all. When industries can't fill jobs, when tax revenue shrinks, and when their entire towns lose their, young people, ideology meets arithmetic. No amount of political will can reverse a shrinking population without new people entering the system. The irony is that Poland's resistance to EU relocation might isolate it just when it needs, cooperation the most. Brussels has leverage through funding, trade, and investment. And if Poland's labor model starts to falter, foreign capital could shift to countries with easier labor access. A nationalist policy meant to defend independence could end up deepening dependence on external support. Public opinion, however, remains firm. Most Poles still reject large-scale migration and trust leaders who promise control. The sentiment is rooted in history, centuries of invasion, partition, and cultural pressure that have built a national instinct for caution. But this instinct, once protective, may now be self-limiting. A wall built for the defense can also trap the future inside it. The warning signs are already visible. Factories are automating faster than expected. Hospitals are erring from Asia because, domestic nurses are leaving. Universities are merging departments as enrollment declines. These aren't abstract projections, they're signals of a society adjusting to fewer people. If the pattern continues, Poland could face a slow demographic recession even as its GDP remains stable on paper. The question is no longer whether Poland can control migration, it's whether Poland can survive without it. The answer will shape not only its economy, but its identity with Europe. The path of total self-reliance looks noble until the math no longer works. In the end, population doesn't care about politics, and labor markets don't respect ideology. The numbers are indifferent. The truth is, the wall protecting Poland today could become its, well, demographic coffin tomorrow. So, yeah, if you think this story ends here, think again. You see, what's happening in Poland is just one piece of a much larger shift reshaping economies across the world. The next video takes that tension even further, and I honestly think you need to see it. Because every number, every policy, and every choice connects to something bigger. So, go ahead. You can either click the top or the bottom. I don't know where the link is going to go, but yeah, click that to watch the next one now.